panel today. Very exciting. You can tell I'm into immigration. Immigration and the future of work in America. So leading our panel today is Emmy and National Magazine Award winner Alex Koppelman of CNNMoney.
So yes, I'm the managing editor of CNNMoney, which 1 week from today relaunches as CNN Business, focusing on the future of business, on the future of the economy, really the future of the world, especially coming through tech. I'm going to use that transparent shill as a brilliant segue into introducing our panel to talk about the future of work. So first we have Haseeb Ahmad, who's the Director of Immigration at U.S. Services for Global Expertise, based in Dallas, Texas. He's had nearly a 30-year career as a leading expert on U.S. immigration law, and his expertise on U.S. immigration includes experience within consular operations and management, global mobility immigration support, and governmental legal research. Then we have Ayesha Blackwell-Hawkins, who's the global head for talent mobility at Johnson & Johnson, where she's responsible for all aspects of talent mobility. Last year named as one of Deloitte's Women to Watch in the tech, media, and telecom fields. And before that was at Amazon.com for 9 years, where she focused on immigration and global mobility functions, and where we'll also need to talk about why my packages keep arriving in 3 days instead of the promised 2. And then we also have Robert Groban, a member of Epstein Becker Green and national chairperson of his immigration law group. Over 35 years experience counseling employers on how to employ foreign nationals, working with them in developing appropriate risk management policies, and representing them in worksite enforcement and other immigration-related civil or criminal litigation. There we go, that's our panel. So, first question. We'll start with a very easy one. What's the importance of immigration and global mobility to business and to the future of business and the future of work?
So, I mean, look, I think I've spent about a little over a decade at 3 different multinationals in at least 2 different sectors. It's hard for me to classify Amazon and tell what industry they actually fit in. But I think from my perspective, what I've been seeing is immigration is really about plugging gaps in skill sets. And I think in the U.S. there are some gaps in skill sets that we have available in the local talent market, but I don't think that's exclusive to the U.S. I think I see that globally in different countries. There's just, either an abundance of skill sets, but there's always that gap that you need to fill. So from my perspective, what I've seen over the last 12 years is corporates usually use this to import a new skill that they need to launch a new product, to build something new, or to service their customer. But that's, and I think that will not go away, that will continue. So, it's not just about inbound to the U.S., but it's really globally. Most corporations are sending people either around the world or into the U.S. But it's not just the U.S. problem. I would say it's not just the U.S. need.
Yeah, from my perspective, obviously immigration is very important to my department. That's what keeps the engine running. But if you look at this clinically, you're dealing with, in the United States, a relatively static population, an aging population with a relatively low birth rate. Yet the economy is expanding, and it's expanding into skill sets, as Ayesha talked about, where we're just simply not developing domestically the skills we need. At the same time, we're competing on a global level. So, Japan, China, Europe, all of these skill sets are being sought globally. So the notion of competing domestically and competing successfully globally really depends a great deal on the talent mobility that you're able to attract. And that's why immigration is such a critical component of an organization's talent acquisition program, at least from our perspective.
To me, these are great ideas, and just to take it one step further, when you bring in new concepts and new ideas, it doesn't have to come from a set of pool of talent that you have available in the United States. If you talk about education, people getting education in different ways. But every culture and society reacts to education in their own method. So in some countries, the culture towards education is to get a job, make more money, get more talents. For some people, for some cultures, for some societies, it's about their passion, and then bringing in new ideas and new concepts. And when you have a matching demand in the United States, you want to widen that talent pool for yourself. And immigration is a process that complements that and provides you the opportunity to bring in, to seek those the talented people overseas and bring them in and then employ them gainfully for their benefit and also for your benefit. So as you expand your market beyond the US boundaries to an international audience, you like to meet their demand. And the way you can do that is by responding to them culturally in their own culture. That's why cultural marketing is now becoming a concept with companies that are actually offering products to other countries. So that's what basically immigration does.
So let's talk about just outside the U.S. Uber is building a major office in Toronto. Instacart, the food delivery company, is just in the news as doing the same. Amazon, it's on the short list for HQ2. The fact that all these tech companies are looking there and looking to open there, what does that say about the future of immigration in the U.S. and the future of work in the U.S. and mobility globally?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of growth up north, right? And it could be looked at two different ways. This seems, from an immigration perspective, right now, I think we can agree that immigration in the U.S. is getting a little bit tighter and more restrictive. In Canada, it isn't, right? And so that does make it easier. I think that can be some of the impetus for moving. I don't necessarily know if that's the only reason. I think the co-location of having a headquarters here and a second headquarters in Canada or a nearby office just makes it easier to collaborate. So I've seen, particularly in the tech industry, that there tends to be a desire to co-locate to collaborate versus collaborating around the world. So that could be some of it. I don't know if that will have an impact on immigration in the U.S., right? You don't know, and if it does, how long will it take? So meaning, if you look and say, hey, Canada, you can sort of flesh out the future of, hey, Canada has more open borders, they're creating faster than developing more. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't. But would that then turn the tide here in the U.S. to say, hey, will this impact the U.S. immigration? Will they get more open in that respect? I don't know. It's hard to tell. Do you have a crystal ball that you can?
Very cloudy, and my granddaughter took it, so it's not going to work very well. I think one way to look at this, and I hate to do it legally, but that's what I do. The last major piece of immigration reform we had was in 1990. And when you talk about immigration reform, you're talking about political judgments as to who should be permitted into the United States. And in that statute, one of the companions was the I-9 and enforcement. There was a whole big piece of that. But the flip side of that was a preference scheme as to who ought to be allowed. And the political judgments were made that there are certain categories of people that we need. The problem is that we're now, 28 years from 1990. The economy has changed a tremendous amount. Immigration reform cratered in 2007. When it did, Microsoft set up a facility in Canada to try and take advantage of it. But we have a severe misalignment between what our statutory permissives are and what our economic and business needs are. And what we're constantly doing is trying to fit relatively square pegs into round holes. The problem with the current administration is that I think business had generally figured out what the square pegs were and what the round holes were, with some cooperation on the part of government recognizing that the statute wasn't always aligned to business interests and we were squeezing certain things into various categories. The laws haven't changed, the regulations haven't changed, but the interpretations have changed. And so what that's done is to constrict the availability of U.S. immigration categories, make the whole situation a little more unpredictable, a little more inconsistent, which is very difficult from a business perspective. Because even people who are here in valid visa classifications cannot be assured that when they apply for an extension, that the criteria for that extension will be the same. Early last year, the Trump administration said that it would no longer give deference to prior approvals. So everything is new. Now they have the ability to do that, but that creates a level of uncertainty, a level of anxiety. I can't comment how that compares with other countries because I think that the perception is that the U.S. may have been a little bit easier, so we're tightening it up. But if the idea is America first workers to fill these jobs, we're not filling them. As I indicated before, we have tremendous gaps in technology, and by restricting the immigration laws from a global competitive standpoint, we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit.
I just have,
Sorry, let me just go back to Robert for 1 second. When we were talking before, you mentioned there's also a potential legal hiccup for companies trying to bring workers from Toronto to here. Can you just tell everybody about that? I thought it was interesting.
Oh, okay. Well, there's an enforcement side of immigration. And there's a series of admissibility criteria where we're putting a statute in 1952. So if you take a look at that, if you were a communist, you got big troubles. Because what was the year of 1952? It was McCarthy and a whole bunch of things. One of those admissibility criteria relates to the possession of a controlled substance. So what is a current minefield in U.S. immigration and immigration generally? You send somebody up to Canada, great, we got them in, all the rest of that. Canada is legalizing their marijuana. The marijuana laws are being liberalized next month. So if that individual buys marijuana in Canada where it's legal, comes into the United States, are they going to be admissible, or are they going to be rejected as a trafficker of a controlled substance, which would make them permanently excludable from the United States? We have the same issue in states that have legalized this. And so, it's just, this is a multifaceted problem. And they're just issues that we're confronting. Again, that the laws haven't changed, but the culture has changed, the mores have changed. Things that are perceived to be benefits for large groups of people, where you're talking about foreign nationals, can be really death traps in certain circumstances.
I think if these companies are moving solely because of the current immigration environment, and I believe they're overreacting. This is basically temporary, and it's going to go away over time. I'll give you an example. In 2001, when we had the 9/11 incidents, I was in the Middle East working for State Department, and then suddenly we had this huge security crisis. Some countries, so our student visa population kind of like decreased. We weren't issuing a lot of student visas because there was a lot of scrutiny going on. DHS was being formed, so there were a lot of things in progress, and people were trying to figure out things. So everything was kind of like put on hold. So all these students, international students who wanted to come in to the United States to study here, they were kind of like lost. So one country in the Middle East took advantage of that. Dubai, UAE, actually created an academic city around it and invited all these international campuses to establish their campus in that academic city. So they brought in people from universities from Canada, from the United States, from Australia, and then they will fly in faculty every month for a short period of time, and then they had local faculty hired to sort of like take care of that population. And then their student visa laws were kind of like so liberal that anybody could just walk in, get an admission, and then just be part of that. But over the years, we learned that academic city proved to be not as useful as they thought it was, because everybody who wanted to come in, if I were to get admission in the University of Arizona at a Dubai campus, I would get a degree from there at the University of Arizona and Dubai campus, but my skill set or the kind of respect that I would get out of that degree is not when I've studied University of Arizona in the U.S. So that kind of like faded away, and then starting of this decade, we seeing different reactions. So the kind of the student population from the foreign student population started increasing. It's not to what was post 9/11, but it's far much better than what this academic city would have done if people had reacted the way the government of UAE had thought. So I believe in this. I think this is overreaction, and this is going to go away over time, and so people are going to come back.
And if I can just piggyback on that, I think you're exactly right. I think, the U.S. isn't the only country that goes through political cycles, right? You see this everywhere. Canada went through a phase where it was very restrictive. It wasn't that long ago where it was just really hard to get workers into Canada. It's all based on the political cycle, and it does come back around. But I do remember a time when getting workers into Canada was just so difficult, whether or not they had the skill set available there, right? So it was challenging. So I don't think that's a silver bullet to managing the immigration issues here. Right?
So, and not just talking about policies under the Trump administration, but going back to during the Obama administration and the Bush administration, is the immigration system in the U.S. Helpful to business? Is it helping U.S. business be competitive, or is it creating an obstacle?
I believe the immigration system in the United States is too friendly to immigrants. Our objective is actually granting benefits than denying benefits. So the purpose of the entire immigration system is to grant benefit to individuals who seek it legally. Now, do we need to create a balance between the system that we have and have stricter laws? Yes, there's a necessity for that. So we need to create some sort of a balance between the current immigration laws and the discretionary aspect of the immigration law. Actually makes it even more uncertain. Like Robert said, that the laws are there, but the implication of laws have changed. So right now the extension is not automatic anymore. So the extension would go through because there's a huge amount of discretion in the law. So the system is designed to basically provide benefit. So we need a system, immigration system, where there's a balance, where we need to find a balance between these two systems. Whether we are allowing people that we don't want to come into the United States, do all these bad things, or do you want to create a tougher immigration system to have human trafficking and have an environment for human trafficking? So you have illegal immigrations coming from South America or from other parts of the world. So I think there's a time for us to have a balanced immigration system, so it addresses both of the issues. But I personally believe it's a very immigrant-friendly immigration environment, and that's because I worked with this for over 28 years, looking at petitions and interviewing visa applicants. And there was always situations, and I had other colleagues who were in situations where they knew there was something wrong, but law wouldn't allow them to stop that person. So you just hold your nose and let it go.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I think that, first of all, we have to define what the immigration system is. What we've been focusing on is one piece of the immigration system, which is the visa classification that allows foreign nationals to come in, work, go to school, things like that. But that's just one part of it. When you talk about political judgments as to who's coming into this country, and every country has a sovereign right to determine who comes in. So it is a political judgment, it's a judgment entrusted to Congress. Family immigration is a huge piece of this. We have a diversity lottery where regardless of what you do, as long as you can read and write, you can sign up and possibly you can come in. Are those in our political interest? These are legitimate questions that are on the floor. When you open the book on immigration, you decide what the next generation is going to be. Family unification has always been very important. but who are we admitting? What's their educational background? Are we really advancing the economy of the United States by expanding family immigration? I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying when we talk about immigration, it's an integrated system. Also part of this system is when I talked about cannabis and the admissibility criteria, that's part of the system. Who comes in? The 9/11 default was, frankly, the admissibility criteria were not applied, there were no interviews, and so it has gotten tougher because now every case is interviewed in large reaction to 9/11 where the terrorists just simply, it was a slot machine visa issuance. Now Haseeb comes out of the Department of State, and historically the Department of State has been a lot more user-friendly to immigration than Homeland Security. What Homeland Security is, there were one huge dysfunctional agency, and that was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and then they broke it up into 3 dysfunctional agencies, which is CBP and Immigration, USCIS, and ICE. And what's been happening recently is that because of the discretion that Haseeb talked about, predictability is out the window. We submitted 2 weeks ago 3 applications that were absolutely identical. One got approved, one got RFE'd, and the other one asked for stupid little questions.
What's RFE?
RFE means a request for additional evidence. Exactly the same application. What is wrong with that system? It means it went to 3 different exams. Is it a training issue? Is it a mental issue? Part of the problem I have is that sure, things are going to change, but are they going to change next week? Are they going to change next month? The current administration was elected to put a clamp on immigration, and they are in the process of doing that. And once that ship starts turning, it takes a while because you're dealing with entrenched bureaucracies to turn it back. And so, you know, these things do go in cycles, but we're not talking about cycles or months of years. We're talking about cycles of several years. And, you know, to the extent that the current administration remains, that's their mandate. And that's going to continue for 8 years.
You know, when I look at this, I wouldn't say it's, you know, too easy or too hard. I say it's relative comparatively, right? So I've seen different countries where it's very challenging, far more challenging than the U.S. and even less predictable and consistent than it is today, as well as much easier, right? I think the difference in the U.S. now is that it's changed and we're in that change curve. So where you see what was, as Bob talked about, where it was previously very predictable and consistent, you could manage to timelines, it helps you plan your business so you sort of know what you can apply for and you have a relative degree of certainty that you will get approved. That no longer exists. So when you, on the back end of that is a business and a job that needs to be filled, a product that needs to be launched, a team that needs to be led, or, you know, some task that needs to be done to keep your business on. That makes it very challenging to deal with that. But again, the U.S. isn't the only market where, it's not the only country where it's unpredictable, inconsistent, inflexible. There are plenty of them like that. There are plenty that work better. So for me, I give the standard lawyer, well, it depends on where you sit, right? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? It just depends on, you know, where you sit right now.
One last question for me, and then we'll open it up. As they look at the next 5 or 10 years or even beyond, what should businesses be focusing on when they think about immigration and mobility? From a strategic perspective, legal, HR, holistically?
Well, we represent businesses, and part of what we do is trying to advise them to be proactive as opposed to reactive. You know, just some concrete examples. You take a look at what the Trump administration is contemplating. Right now, there are certain spouses of workers who were mired in the green card process who can work. And the notion is, will that work authorization remain? It was created by regulation under the Obama administration. The noise out of the Trump administration is that they want to eliminate it. Optional practical training for F1 students. They've gotten a year, STEM degrees, an additional 2. Is that going to remain? So when we're talking about the future of things, is NAFTA going to stay the way it is? And what's immigration under that going to be like? Are the current interpretations? I mean, to some extent I agree with Ayesha in the sense that It's the uncertainty that's the problem. If you had a predictable system, even if it was narrower than it was before, you could work around it. So trying to be proactive, you have all these moving pieces, and what you're doing is you're trying to look at the more stable elements of the business immigration process and work proactively to take advantage of them so that you can be more predictable in terms of who you can hire, what the timeline is, because, I mean, aside from all the organizational interests, you have human interests involved in all of this, and you have individuals, and you have their families, and you have all of this mixed up in the process. So what we're trying to do is, let's assume that this category is not going to be here in a year. How are we going to fill those slots? How are we going to do that? If it's a multinational organization, are there global ways that we can deal with it? Are they looking at other countries to try and solve some of these problems? And so what we're trying to do, and this is, it's 2 years, 3 years, because you got to plan really 6 years out if this administration remains in the way it's going, and look at just monitor the tea leaves of what they're doing, and try and plan to fill organizational needs within an existing system. That's a little bit of a moving target, but that's what we're trying to do.
No, this has been such a fascinating discussion. I do want to open it up to the entire audience. Does anyone have a question specifically about immigration? Yes, please.
And you touched on it a little bit. As someone who runs a large higher ed institution where students are coming from Canada, hopefully none that have spoken any Canadas, coming across the border to have internship type experiences here, it certainly makes me think that the volatility around that is such that those opportunities could be obviously at risk. Their ability to get J1 visas and these other visas. So what's your take on that? How risky is that?
Well,
Risky? A little bit risky?
Again, the statute hasn't changed. I think the regulatory process in the J1 area has gotten tighter because there have been some abuses. We're aware of Disneyland, and we're aware of other kinds of things where the perception is that J1 trainees were used for improper purposes. What I was really more talking about is people tend to focus on the visa classification and not so much on the admissibility criteria. And so, what may have passed before, I was concerned about students unknowingly engaging in activities that may be legal in their countries and find that they're ineligible for visas because of that.
Yeah, no, I understand that point.
But, because Congress is at an impasse, I don't see any statutory changes. I don't see any meaningful regulatory changes. So I think those will still be available. The tighter piece will be in the visa adjudication part, which Haseeb is more familiar with.
One of the things that I believe is very important to understand, when you're hiring or bringing in a student, it's quite different from bringing in an international student or an international employee. The timeline that the companies usually provide, they just assume that it's the same as hiring a local talent. One of the things that the DHS struggles with, the USCIS especially, and INS used to struggle with that a long time ago, was the backlog. The amount of work they have and the kind of people they have available to do that. So whenever a company is going into a program that is going to engage an international student or an international employee, they have to give enough time. So they need to plan way ahead of time to make sure they have enough time to meet certain requirements. Not every application is successful. There could be a request for additional evidence. There could be a denial, and we could change strategies or work with the system to find ways around it. So you need to have enough time. That's I believe is the key to that.
I should add, Dr. McGray, for most J1 sponsors, at least for marijuana, since immigration's at a federal level, we generally are not sponsoring positions in those types of industry. Any additional questions? Yes?
So I work on a J1 program, trainee intern, and I think everyone in this room has positive experiences with international exchange, working abroad, hosting. So I'm all for all kinds of international exchange. We have people on E's and H's in our office. How do you address the challenge of the public perception? You mentioned Disney under the J, but I think everyone remembers the H1B story with Disney, when they interviewed 10 people on 60 Minutes who were former Disney employees who said, I had to sit next to my replacement from a country with a lower cost of labor and train him for a week, and then I was fired. And then that gets out, and then we have the political repercussions that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years that you're seeing now also in Europe. Populism, closing the borders, things like that. When you have these, what we can call misuses or abuses of valid visa categories, how do we fight that public perception?
So I think, one of the things that I've seen just in my travels is that what's really important was around framework, right? I think all companies have to have an internal framework to manage talent mobility, and a component of that is immigration, and that framework has to include some component of your public policy or government affairs team, so that as you're looking at your company and you're deciding, okay, how do we do this? What's our public stance on this? I think there was a time where a public stance or having readily available your access to public policy wasn't necessary to say, hey, I deal with immigration, I sort of sat in a little hole and managed these pieces for different companies, but over time, with it being so politicized, there has to be a tight link across all functions of the organization so you can have that. And generally what I've seen is the best way to do this is to align it to your company values, whether it's your leadership principles or your corporate values. That way you have a framework to manage decisions on how to manage that potential, what I call dark PR, right? If your company suddenly is being the target of a hit of, hey, they're using H-1Bs inappropriately, make sure you have a good compliance component in place so you can stand by how you're sponsoring this, but also make sure you understand why do you use immigration, what's the purpose of it, and then have that tight connection with your public policy teams or your government affairs teams with a policy that aligns to your internal corporate values or leadership principles. That I have found has been very, that decision-making framework has been very handy in managing to, okay, we're suddenly the target of a press piece that says we're misusing it or we're, hiring foreign workers over U.S. workers. Those three pieces together can help really define how you respond to those.
And I think because of the public perception, the planning that goes into, whether it occurred at Disney, I think there was a similar situation, it was on 60 Minutes at UCSF, where they outsourced a program that apparently saved hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the planning for that may not have been as robust because the public perception is predictable. So how are your public relations people getting involved? How are your government affairs people getting involved? There's also this, I've always referred to it as the Maytag repairman of the Department of Justice. There's this Office of Special Counsel was created in the 1986 Act that created the I-9 process because they were worried about discrimination. And one of the things that's occurred in reaction to the Disney things is they're looking at discrimination under the immigration laws, U.S. citizens versus foreign nationals, in precisely those kind of situations. So it's a collage of planning involving legal, involving public relations. If you're using H's, especially because that's been the favorite whipping boy of a number of administrations, then the public response is predictable if you're going to have a layoff or you're going to have some situation where you're bringing in H-1 workers and it's going to affect local workers. So you need to have an action plan that's not simply, I think, purely compliance, but you've got to be able to tell the story. I mean, there was a story at Disney, there was a story at UCSF, but I'm not sure that they got out in front of it. And so they were reactive in a way that made it difficult to recapture things. I mean, ultimately the lawsuits at Disney were dismissed and all the rest of that, but I'm not sure the story ever got out.
Any addition?
I just have something to add to the perception part. The perception is on both sides. It's just not on the U.S. side. It's also on the foreign worker side. Because foreign workers that the embassies deal with overseas, they actually have a perception about the U.S. society and the U.S. business environment. When they commit to a certain amount of money because of and the company is offering the job to the foreign worker because it's cheap labor. When the foreign worker comes in, they have to live in these lifestyles and these conditions, and that actually changes the perception. So you must have noticed, if you follow immigration, agent petitions that were there a long time ago are kind of like dying, because that was the basic source of bringing in cheap labor into the market, put them on a bench for a while, and then find them projects to place them into replacement. And Robert is right. H-1B is always on the top of every government agenda or every organization agenda for immigration, because they see all these workers taking jobs. But they bring in talent. But I think the perception is on both sides, not just from one side, but overseas foreign workers are also learning now that H-1B is not the solution, because there's a family pressure, there's a family issues with this. When the families are separated, people are not able to bring in their families to the United States due to the H-1B, certain restriction in the H-1B, or they go through certain financial hardships. So I think the perception is on both sides.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes?
So I appreciate your comment about, from the perspective of business, a lot of the challenges is that we're in a period of transition and trying to sort this through today. And I see that very much from the side of the university to this. And so I want to ask the question, sort of a little bit of guidance of this, of kind of the communications we have from the university side. One of the issues we know that in terms of recruiting top international students to come to study in the United States, the global market's getting much more competitive. And one of the factors that is a major issue for international students in deciding where to study is the issue of employability. Where am I likely, not just where am I likely to get a job, but how is that return on investment of my degree likely to translate into ability to get a job? One of the challenges we have from the university side is exactly that same sort of unpredictability. And so when talking about some of the things like OPT and being able to do that kind of planning, because of the kind of uncertainty in that space, and we don't know what's going to happen, it's making it very, very, very difficult to be able to give a clear message about about how to anticipate or how to get sort of that return for the experience that would be necessary for their degree. Any guidance and from the university side to this of how we message this out as we are also dealing with this particular kind of period of uncertainty as the system is kind of working its way through to this?
You know, that's a hard one, right? Because I think companies, more often than not, at least with the companies that I've been associated with, you know, compliance was a premium, right? So you want to be able to say, hey, we're compliant, we'll do what the law allows us for, you know, regular business needs. But that issue, and I had wondered if it kicked to the universities, that when will it be not such a great place to get a degree? One of the things I saw in my travels was that, you know, employees, you could say, hey, if we apply for the H-1B, you don't get it, then we may be able to transfer you out to another location. And there was real resistance to that. It was very specific. I have all of these U.S. loans for my school. That salary you're going to give me in this market is not going to be effective to pay off those loans. And so, you know, it was almost predictable that this would happen, that if there wasn't a guarantee that I could work at least for a period of time and be able to pay off the loans that I had for school, that I may not come here. So it's an interesting, I don't have any good advice other than, you know, I think what you could do, and you know, my prior role started socializing with, hey, there are certain companies where you're going to be able to grow no matter what, no matter what country you sit in. You're going to get the good work. You're going to be able to use your skill set there. And if it's in the U.S., great. If it's not, there's other places you can go, and start to really look at those multinationals that have those rotational programs or those spaces where they say, hey, we want the talent. There are certain companies that say, hey, we want the best talent in the world, no matter where they are, and we'll place them as long as they're within our ecosystem. And maybe that's the focus on, hey, there are companies like this, you will work, maybe it's not the U.S., but you will get to do the work that you're passionate about and the work that you've trained for.
Yeah, I think...
No, that's an answer, but...
Well, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think part of it is that the educational community needs to be far more active in terms of lobbying the administration and the key legislators that sit on the committees in terms of where these rules are going. The other piece is that career opportunity departments need to be a lot more active in locating the kinds of organizations so that for your top students in your predictable categories, there is an end path, that you form partnerships with companies that can provide a light at the end of that particular tunnel. But you know, from our side, there are only a certain number of arrows in the quiver, and they're getting smaller. So it's very difficult to message that. I know there's a lawsuit pending in the DC circuit, and part of it has to do with this question of STEM eligibility. And every month, the Trump administration submits something to the DC circuit that says, wait a few months, we're dealing with it. So it's like sitting there with a sort of Damocles hanging over you, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. But to me, sitting back and waiting for that sword to drop is not the solution. It's being far more active in this administration seems to be somewhat sensitive to the political ramifications of a number of things. And it just seems to me that that's the way to hammer it, as well as being more active in a career opportunity setting, so that we're not simply, when somebody comes in looking for a position, but we're forming partnerships that might provide a better mechanism for your students.
Great questions and great answers. I'd like to thank Alex and Haseeb and Ayesha and Robert for their information today.